Hello friends, this is Javier Castillo again. Today is May 6th, a wonderful Wednesday. Yesterday I recorded another podcast and I forgot to tell everybody happy Cinco de Mayo. So happy belated Cinco de Mayo. And it was Taco Tuesday as well, so I hope you all had some Taco Tuesdays with no coronavirus beer, of course. Today's podcast deals with the time when I went to my first hearing by myself and I was challenged to a fight. That's right, challenged to a fight by another attorney. Here's how it went. My very first appearance was about a week after I was sworn in as an attorney, and one of the partners from my firm, Gilbert Nishimura, took me to my first appearance, and he gave me tips, told me how to do it. He said, watch the other attorneys, you'll be fine. So it was a simple status conference, so everything went really easy. I got up there. I probably wasn't up there for more than a minute. I informed the judge that everybody was served. We're ready to set a trial. We're ready to begin discovery. And that was pretty much it. I explained probably a little bit about what the case was, and that was it. After that, Mr. Nishimura said, yeah, you're fine. We'll find another hearing for you to go to next week or so. So yeah, like a week or two later, I got to go to a hearing on my own. So this was my second appearance, but first appearance on my own. Okay, fresh attorney, probably less than 3 weeks after being sworn in as an attorney. And it was a motion to set aside a default and default judgment. And this case was interesting only because of how it went. This particular defendant was properly served. He had even been in contact with the office, with our law firm, not me personally, but with others. And they had told him, they had warned him, look, sir, you need to file an answer within 30 days or we're going to take your default. When the time passed, they kept telling him. They even wrote him several letters, sent him certified mail. And this was the crux of his defense, is that he had never been properly served because he lived in an apartment complex where it was a V shape, and on one side it was numbered 1 through 10 or 11 or 12, and on the other side it went from A through J or something like that. And he claimed that he had not been served because he lived in apartment 3, but we mailed it to apartment C. So in any event, he knew about the lawsuit. He'd been talking to us. He had even sent us letters. But still, he claimed he had not been served. So we opposed the motion after we had obtained a default and a default judgment. And some significant time had passed, probably something like 6 months after the initial complaint had been filed. But in California, 6 months after a judgment is entered, you can still move to set it aside, as long as it's within the timeline, which is 1 year. So after the judgment was entered, he got an attorney, and the attorney helped him file the motion. So here I was, going to defend against this motion, and my only job was to just argue against the motion, which we figured would get granted, that they would set aside the default and the default judgment. But I was also to argue that he should pay us our attorney's fees for lollygagging and for making us waste all this time. So that's what I did. Now, about a week before this hearing, I had gone to a CLE. CLE stands for Continuing Legal Education. It's a requirement that the state bar has on attorneys. Every year we're supposed to do a certain number of hours, and every 2 or 3 years we report to the state bar. So I had gone to a free CLE all-day seminar. I think it was put on by the state bar or one of the local court of appeals, and they had some judges there. There was one court of appeal judge, a couple superior court judges, and celebrity attorney Mark Garagos was there as well. And they served us lunch, and they had snacks and a lot of materials, a lot of good, helpful tips actually. But at that moment, when I went to this hearing, for some reason I was thinking of my argument and sitting there waiting for my case to be called, I looked at the judge, and right behind him is the seal of the state of California, which I imagine in most state courts, they'll have the state seal or the state flag or something. So on the seal of California, they have a few very prominent items. They have the Golden Gate Bridge, of course. They've got the bear, right, the Cal Bear. And then they've got a woman. And I never knew who the woman was. So this appellate court judge, I don't remember his name, told us that the woman was Minerva, and that she symbolized the coming out of nowhere that the state, how it developed. You know, he said that Minerva magically appeared out of Zeus's head, and California likewise had magically appeared out of nowhere to become a state in a very short period of time, right after the gold rush. So I was thinking about that, and when I thought about the words magically appeared, I thought, hey, I could use that in my argument, because this guy claims that he he never was served, and now he just magically appears all of a sudden after being in contact with us. I was trying to put together the metaphor for the judge, and so in my argument, I brought it up. I said something like, Your Honor, this man reminds me of Minerva, although in a different sense. As you may be aware, Minerva magically popped out of the head of Zeus, and we have this defendant who is now magically popped out of the woodwork to say that he was never served. I think it was something like that. I might have said it a little bit more eloquently at the time. I think my speaking skills have somewhat deteriorated since then. But anyways, the judge granted the motion. He actually raised an eyebrow when I mentioned Minerva. He didn't know what I was talking about. And the second part of my argument dealt with the attorney's fees. And he said, no, I'm not even going to let you argue that. He's like, it's a very small case. It's not worth it. The guy was in pro per as well. So no attorney's fees. Now, the deal with attorney's fees in cases like this is that the judge has the discretion. But in this case, he thought it was a very small case. I'm not going to mention the number that was involved, but I agree with him in my mind. And we knew he was going to set aside the judgment as well, because judges generally prefer, overwhelmingly, I think, to have a case heard on the merits as opposed to in a default basis, because at least if it's heard on the merits, of course, there's some semblance of justice happening, even though there's not always an intersection of justice and legality. Or another way to put it is the legal system doesn't always intersect with justice. And I've got some ideas about that to tell you about later. But anyways, that was the gist of what happened at the hearing. And I felt pretty good because I was up there for about 10, maybe 15 minutes talking, having a back and forth with the other attorney. And I felt at that moment that I was really falling into the shoes of an attorney. I was really advocating my point. And I felt pretty comfortable. I wasn't really nervous. Everything seemed okay. So the hearing ends. I say, thank you, Your Honor. We leave. We go to the back of the audience, out the door, and into the hallway. And I was going to just speak to the other attorney and say, all right, what can we do to settle this? Let's talk settlement, or, what do you want to do? Something. And this attorney instead started yelling at me. He got into my face, started pointing at me, and he said, he basically challenged me to a fight. He said, I'm going to, kick your butt. And he said, another thing I remember he said was, how dare you clown me like that in front of the judge? I guess he was referring to the Minerva quote about Zeus, and he was really upset. He was an older attorney. I was 31 years at the time, and he was an older man, probably 50, 55 years old, maybe even a little older. Not in shape. At that time, I was 31. I was still working out and running, and very fit, and I had been in the military. I was a wrestler. I did all these things, and I was in my head. I was thinking, what is this guy doing? This was something that just floored me. I was absolutely not prepared for an attorney to challenge me to a fight. It was something that I had never even crossed my mind. You know, coming out of law school and being a new attorney, you still have this idealism about what practicing law is, and I thought everybody's going to be civil. You know, you'll maybe get in a shouting match or an argument, but you know, at the end of the day, you're both attorneys just simply doing your job. But this guy took it a step forward, and I'm not even going to say what many of the things he said, but he was challenging me to a fight, and I was thinking, I'm not going to get into a fight with this old man. That's how I saw it then. And I, you know, a little voice was like, just hit him once, he'll go down. But no, I didn't do that. I composed myself. I didn't know what to say either. And it was becoming a spectacle in the hallway there, because other people walking by, probably attorneys, they were looking and they stopped their conversations and they were listening to this maniac. And finally I just said to him, I said, I think you have some issues. I'm leaving. And I walked away. And he said a couple other things, but I ignored him. I walked away. This was at the Alhambra Courthouse in LA County. I went back to my law firm and I told everybody, and they were so surprised. They were, you know, there were some of them were laughing, and they said, let's look the guy up. You know, you can look up attorneys on the State Bar website. So we looked them up, and I'm not going to mention his name, but he, you know, it used to be in those days, it would show your undergraduate school and where you went to college, and then it would show your law school, where you went to law school. Now it only shows your law school. So we looked at it, and he didn't have an undergraduate school listed. It said C State Bar card for information, something like that. And then for law school, he had a law school that was called Van Norman, and I didn't know what it was. I had never heard of that school. But some of the partners in the firm, and there was a couple of older attorneys who knew about the law school, and this is what they told me about it. They said that Van Norman used to be a school that was right around the downtown courthouse. The downtown courthouse is at 111 North Hill, and they said the Van Norman School was right around there, maybe on Temple or Wilshire, just up the street a little bit, and it had a real bad reputation, and not because, you know, they were producing bad attorneys or anything like that, but I guess they were selling drugs out of there, and some other illicit stuff was happening. So it got closed down, and so, you know, when the older attorneys saw that he was from Van Norman, they kind of did one of these. They said, makes sense. Yeah, okay. So that was my second appearance, and but I'm not going to say that that's a general thing for LA attorneys. I mean, I think LA attorneys in general are probably more aggressive than anywhere else. You know, I started practicing in LA, and I learned the ropes there. And then I went up to San Francisco, and it seemed to be a little bit more collegial up there. And then when I moved back down to Southern California, I was in what's called the Inland Empire. I practiced at a couple of firms in Riverside, and then I had my own practice out there in Riverside County. And that was really collegial out there. It's a smaller bar than, of course, you know, Los Angeles. So it seemed like everybody out there knew each other, and it was much more collegial, much more civil. I think that among attorneys will probably tell you that, you know, wherever they practice in their particular area, everybody probably knows each other. And I think that, you know, there's always a couple of bad apples in the barrel, but everybody kind of, you know, treats them at arm's length. So that happened to me. True story. I'll swear to it. And I still know the guy. I think he's still practicing. I never had another encounter with him because he's out in the San Fernando Valley, and now I'm out in Covina, so I rarely get any encounters with attorneys out that way. So that was something very shocking that happened to me when I was a young attorney, and I hope that never happens to any you know, law school students or anybody that thinks about becoming an attorney. I have also heard other stories from attorneys in the LA area that you know, that happened in 2002, but I heard stories that back in the 80s and 90s there were fights between attorneys at the downtown courthouse. I've talked to at least two people that said that they witnessed fights. You will see fights periodically, actually, at courts, but it's usually between the litigants. Especially, I think they're all in family law cases, or probably criminal cases with family members, you know, of the victim and the accused. But I don't practice criminal law, so I would, for my experiences, it's been in family law cases. So I've got a couple other anecdotes coming up this week, so look out for those. They're probably maybe a little funny as well. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you guys soon. Thank you, and God bless. Bye-bye.